Hey everyone, welcome back to Cult of Film. I'm Kyle, and we're back with Truman. And today we're reviewing, discussing probably one of my favorite movies. It's Battle Royale from 2000. It was directed by Kinji Fukusaku. It was his last film. Any of you that out there that know who Fukusaku is, he's a pretty prolific Japanese director. He did the Battles Without Honor and Humanity series. He did another great, really fun Japanese film. It's kind of a cult film over here called Virus in 1980. And yeah, he is one of Quentin Tarantino's favorites. And of course, we all love Uncle Quint. But yeah, I guess to begin, where would you like to start with this, Truman? Battle Royale.
Um, hmm. Well, when I first saw Battle Royale, I was a teenager, and I think it was at this kind of weird time for the internet and me personally, and like learning about movies where, like everybody that I knew was kind of like a big Hunger Games fan, and I kind of wanted to be the hipster movie guy who was like, oh, well, you know where this all really started, right? Um, and so like I watched Battle Royale and I really loved it and kind of had this movie in my back pocket of like, oh well, this is like the real violent version of kids fighting each other. And I thought it was really cool then. But then recently we all rewatched it and a couple of other things hit me as well. One of the things that really stuck out to me is, when I first watched Battle Royale when I was younger, I'd never seen any other Kinji Fukusaku movies, but
Same,
now,
same. I didn't know that was, yeah.
yeah, but now that I had seen, like Battles Without Honor and Humanity, um,
Hmm.
and like a couple other stuff from that, and then like watching Battle Royale again with the opening, the huge like orchestra.
Hmm.
It hit me immediately. I was like, oh, like yeah, that's Kenji Fukusaga. That's what it does. Because in Battles Without Honor and Humanity has these huge, really really badass musical cues to start it too. It's just one of those things that sticks out of my mind about the movie as being kind of stylistically unique to him, and in my
Hmm.
head, when I think about it now, it's like, oh yeah, like that's how you start a movie, man. Like that's cool. It gets
Right.
your attention, and it lets you know it's like, from a directorial standpoint, it's like they're sitting you down saying like, okay, like pay attention. This is going to be some cool
Right.
shit coming up, and it is.
Right.
Already.
Yeah, it does have sort of this very epic, sort of grand opening, which I like. I also like that it gives you that. And I know there's a lot of people out there that don't like this, but I think it can be done really well. I think Battle Royale does this well. Films like Blade Runner do this well, where it gives you that little sort of set of title cards, sort of explaining the world in which this movie is set, kind of giving you a sense of the culture and the politics, just enough to give you a sense of setting,
Yeah.
and it really sets it up really well. I don't. You might not even need that necessarily, but I think it sort of helps to give you a sense of the severity of the world that you're about to enter into. And
Yeah.
yeah, like you're, this was the first Fukusaku film I had ever seen, and this was before I was really deeply into film. So I didn't even really care who directed it. I just heard so much about this movie. It was infamous because of its violence, because of the sort of controversy around the violence, the way it was initially rated in Japan, the
Yeah.
way it was sort of banned from certain theaters. Certain countries wouldn't show it, and then it sort of became this cult hit when people obviously shared it around the world back in the day when we were still all sharing VHS tapes, and then
Yeah.
eventually the internet happened, and it got an even um, wider outlet. But what's interesting about this is it feels very much like, okay, this had to have been a manga before it was a film, and in fact, it was a novel. I think
Mm.
it had only been out a year, 1 year before it became a film. So this book had a real impact, and Kinji Fukusaku directed a script that was actually written by his son Kenta, and I think it's kind of a nice little capstone for Fukusaku's career because again, this was his last film. He got to work on it with his son, and they end up creating this, frankly, a masterpiece. I think it's easy to sort of relegate it to, oh, it's just another cult film, and it is definitely a cult film that has a cult following, but it is so much more than that. I think people who are of limited imagination and maybe limited intellectual capacity only ever focus on only no it's truly only ever
Right.
focus on the violence like they do with Tarantino films, and they completely miss the point that you're watching this incredible original piece of film. And so I do get annoyed with critics in that regard. But whether you like violence or not, and I didn't go into this movie because I liked violence. I've been a Japanophile my whole life, and I was like, okay, what's the deal with this movie? Because I figured, okay, if it's over the top violent in a stupid way, I can shut it off after 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And within 5 minutes, it had grabbed me, and I really like how they like the whole thing. To me, in so many ways, is an allegory for if you had a rough time in school, and maybe this is why it registered with me so well, because I really did. I had a really rough time in school
Mm.
and just never fit in. A lot of bullying from not just students, but literally from teachers and administrators. Like I won't get into it. So
Yeah.
watching Battle Royale, I was like, yeah, this is pretty accurate. This is, it's not literally what happened, but psychologically, spiritually, it just felt like an effing battle going to school every day from like
Mm.
sixth grade until I graduated high school. So if you had a rough time, or you've ever been an outsider, I think that this movie might hit you maybe a little more deeply, or just you're being a teenager because it's about basically the premise of this film is it takes place at a junior high school, and what you are yeah, basically, I'll just read it here. The film follows a group of junior high school students forced to fight to the death by a Japanese totalitarian government. And yeah, the film drew controversy and was banned and excluded from several distribution countries. So that's the premise, but it's not just stupid violence. These are each one of these characters. I think there's like 42 students. Each one of them, it's amazing they did this. Has sort of their own personality. It's like every type of kid, every type of person, and it's you could look at it that it's like, okay, it's like a Friday the 13th film where you're just knocking people off left and right. It's really not like that. It's so much an examination of the human condition, and not just the human condition in terms of like you're put in survival mode, but just the type of people and how they react to pressure, how they react to, again, having their backs up against the wall, and so
Right.
forth. And it's really brilliant in that way, and that's why I think it's worth watching. It's not just you're not just going for the kills. At least I wasn't, and I don't, because a real thread of humanity, and dare I say, sort of a tragic romanticism that runs through this film. Uh, you really care about some of these kids. Some of them, it's just you could tell, okay, yeah, he chose the dark side. But then there's other characters where you just really sort of care deeply about them.
Right. Yeah. I'm happy to hear that, it resonated so much in particular with you. It's always nice when, you're watching something and it kind of connects with you on that deeper level, in a way that you didn't necessarily expect it to, um, when you're going in. But one thing I'm wondering, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this too, because having watched and now rewatched it, I'm kind of curious why. I feel like I'm not really sure why it was received and kind of has this reputation as being such a like shocking. It's like this banned movie, and
Right.
to me that reputation, not that it's necessarily wrong, but it seems like, I don't know if it's necessarily misplaced, but like when in watching the movie, even when I was 15, I didn't think it was all that shocking. Like it's violent,
Right.
And there are certain things in it that you see and it's like, oh, that's pretty crazy. But I mean, this isn't like Salo or a Serbian film,
No,
like why do you
no.
think it had that reputation when it was released? Have things just like changed? Is it because of kids? Like, what do you
Well,
think?
I mean, you can never account for people's individual sensibilities and tastes. That's always going to be. It's always going to differ. It's always going to. But I do think that there is anytime I think you are involving characters who are basically kids and violence. I think you're going to get people sort of unnerved.
Mm,
And this is thousand. So this was 23 years ago, and at that point, mass shootings weren't a thing, and you obviously had Columbine. What was it, towards the end of the '90s? But it wasn't something that was happening on a regular basis. There's always been this sort of paternalistic, or not even paternalistic, moralistic, puritanical view of any form of sex and violence in media as being negative and being something that is going to, quote unquote, infect the youth. And as someone who grew up watching every cartoon I watched growing up had good guys versus bad guys. There's battles. And I watched, relatively violent movies or action films. And it never gave me the idea to just go outside and start swinging on people
no,
ever.
me neither.
But to answer your story long, I think um, the the I guess the reason why people would consider it controversial is one, it does come from a country that is, at least in its modern history, known as being notoriously gentle and nonviolent. So that's one. So I could see where that might kick up the dander of people in Japan. Here in the U.S., again, we have we have this puritanical strain that runs through our culture that wants to protect us from everything out there that could potentially be offensive.
Yeah,
And I think it's important. I think people sometimes just do not know how to watch films. There are people out there who do not know how to take in a piece of art. For example, I have a friend who was a little more conservative Christian, and I have a small statuette of Michelangelo's David. Okay, one of the most popular sculptures in Western civilization in art history,
mhm.
and he refers to it as a gay statue. It's a gay statue.
Well,
Of course, it's a gay statue because it's a naked male. And I said, well, actually, it's not a sexual piece of art at all. The entire point of the piece of art is that it is sort of displaying the beauty of the male form. It has nothing to do with anything sexual. So again, it depending on how you know how to approach art, because we don't really teach art history. We don't teach people how to know how to evaluate art. And
yeah,
again, you sort of pile in sort of any, if you're coming from a background that sees the human form as shameful, or you see there are just a lot of limitations on how you can express yourself artistically, be it a sculpture or a film. You're just going to always have those people that, oh, it's violent, oh, it's sexual, and then you
yeah,
watch it and it's like, well, it's certainly violent, but to your point, it's not Sallow, it's not Audition, it isn't. There are far worse violent films out there than Battle Royale, and that just leaves me to, I think, one, it involves junior high school kids, and two, anybody who people who are just not used to that or see any depiction of violence in media as a negative are just, they're going to be louder than everyone else.
right.
But in a way, for guys like you and me, or for people who are, you tell us, don't watch this, don't do this, I'm immediately going to find a copy of it. I want to know why this bothers you so much, and I want to see firsthand whether it's as bad as you say it is. That's just how I've always been. But you're
Yeah,
right. There's the violence, and this is the thing. The part of the message of the film is, and Fukusaku is on record in interviews talking about this, because Fukusaku, he was in his 80s when he made this film, and when he passed, so he was old enough to have been a child in World War II and post World War II occupation Japan. So if anybody was able to layer in the allegory of what war does to children, what war does to young people, what war just does to human beings, it was him. And the fact that people who are unnecessarily obsessed with the violence of the film missing those points because it's right there in every frame. Like at first, it's like, oh
Yeah.
well, this is kind of exciting, it happened, and then as it progresses, these students, as they're whittled away one by one, we start to learn a bit more about them, and they become a little bit more human. They're not just, these numbers in this game. And I really feel that that's sort of the heart of the film. And if you can't see that, I think you're a person of limited scope in your life and just should probably go hide in a cave somewhere. But does that make sense?
Yeah, and
I mean,
I
that's
agree.
just my off the top of my head what because I've seen this movie 3 times over the past maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
It's something that I don't visit because it is heavy. It's a lot to take in, but I've seen it 3 times now, and it's clearly an allegory for what contemporary societies and what war can do to young people. What are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I think I agree. All the kind of like the moments that we see where we kind of slow down and get to know the characters are
Right.
really are so critical. I think to giving it that sort of justification that it is, this has deeper meaning to it.
Mhm.
I love good exploitative violence in my movies as much and
Sure.
maybe even more so than the next guy. But I think with this, it can be sometimes a fine line between what is just violence and what is violence that has kind of more thematic substance to it. And I think yes, seeing the kids and seeing who they are in their regular lives outside of being in on this island, when they're just normal people and kind of how they suffer abuse and their insecurities and the things that they fear, like normal kids, and then seeing those exact same people get thrown into this terrible situation is, I think, where we really get kind of like that meaning out of it. And I agree. I think like the fact that it is Japanese and based around this notion of, and, a lot of Japanese movies kind of reckon with the legacy of World War II. I've seen a few films that kind of were made like around the 50s, for instance, that kind of grapple with this notion of like, oh, we're sending, like children to go and die in this terrible war. And I think, seeing that all those things really make it much more substantive. And I agree. I think the naysayers like that are kind of, it's kind of silly to really write it off. And some people can't stomach the violence, I guess, even though I don't think it's
Right.
that shocking. But I
No.
agree. I think it's a shame. But for me personally, I think was the reputation is good. I'm always kind of pleasantly surprised when a story or film or something like this has this reputation of being like
Right.
shocking, violent, and that kind of like acts as a hook for me. Where
Sure.
I'll say, oh, this is so extreme. It's not like nothing you've ever seen before. You gotta watch it. And then you watch it, and then I think for Battle Royale and other things too, there's kind of like this aha moment where you go, oh, like sure, maybe it's a little shocking, but really like there is a true heart, in terms of character and aesthetics
Right.
to this movie, that really make it,
And it is a
a,
very aesthetic film.
yeah,
It's the way it's shot.
it's gorgeous.
It's definitely, they really take care to the aesthetics, and obviously Fukusaku here. Again, he's at the height of his powers. He's been making movies for what, 50 years or something,
Yeah,
for sure. And your point about characters, they did such a good job with that. You clearly have like the nerds that had no power that now have a weapon, and
Mhm.
how it changes the worst. You have the pretty girl who, you know, she's used to using her sort of feminine wiles to get what she wants from the male students, and she just amps that up once she gets a weapon. You've got the holdovers. There's a couple of characters that were like held over from a previous grade that are
Yeah,
like kept in the program that are kind of scary and fun. But yeah, it's like, okay, you went to school with all of these types of people. You've got like the girls that just want to get out alive. They're just like, oh, how do we do this? You're very practical. What do we do? You've got, yeah, it's again a really interesting examination of human nature and the human condition and what happens. Who are you when you're really under pressure, when it's life or death? And they do such a great job with that, with all of these student characters. And it just it grounds it in a lot of ways, because yes, obviously
yeah,
the violence, again, I guess it's over the top. I mean, it's just them killing each off, one by one. It's
yeah,
not necessarily terribly creative. It's like, okay, arrows, knives, and guns. It's not like watching a Friday the 13th movie where you're going to watch for the creative kills. It's
yeah,
not like that at all. So again, I think people should give it a chance if you're of the mind to give movies a chance. If you
yeah,
don't like Japanese cinema, if you don't like any violence at all, I don't know what movies you're watching, but if you don't like movie at all, it's probably not for you. But there is a deeper heart to it. Again, the allegory of what the world can do. What school can do to kids. It was just, I was so very aware, as when I was in school. They're just, okay, there's this weird hierarchy, and there's these different groups and cliques. And when you're not in any of them, you just are able to sort of look at the whole landscape and be like, wow, this
mm,
sucks. How many more years before I'm out of here? You're just looking at it like it's a prison sentence. And that sort of captured just that, the anxiety of youth, of not fitting in, or uh, trying to get out. They really, they fold these layers in really well, I think.
yeah, yeah. Having that objectivity is very helpful as well. It's kind of a blessing in many respects. But I would say, yeah, especially, yeah, you mentioned like if you don't like Japanese movies, then maybe this isn't for you. But I mean, that's such a, even just thinking about it, it's like, man, yeah, what is for you then? But this movie in particular, it draws a lot. It really exhibits a lot of Japanese sensibilities, I think, in terms of its not only the
Sure.
approach to violence, but the approach to juxtaposing that violence with, like these kind of slower, very beautiful moments. There are many
Mm-hmm.
moments throughout the movie where we slow down, and we're kind of like appreciating the sunset. We're listening to Bach, and we're just kind of sitting there and watching and taking it in, and seeing these moments, in this like really beautiful, like kind of island, and there's a lot of bits like when they're sailing away from the island towards the end, or with particularly with Takeshi Kitano, um, that I think again, we get this kind of juxtaposition where we have the violence and we have the beauty of it, and it kind of allows us to reflect in some respect too, where like these kids are going through essentially like the last day of their lives, and I think in a
Right.
lot of sense it kind of makes sense to sort of reflect in the way that someone in that position might kind of want to reflect, and it has this kind of meditative quality to it that I really like. What do you think? Can we talk about sort of like the alternate endings at the very end? You know what I'm talking
Um,
about?
I'm, I'll be honest with you. I'm blanking on the alternate endings, but I would like to. And certainly we can. I'll let you take that, because I'm having a hard time remembering. But I wanted to sort of piggyback off of what you just said, the quieter moments, the softer moments in the movie, it needs to be said that for a movie that is getting nothing but grief over its violence, it has a tremendous amount of time where you're just dealing with the characters that are getting like a brief break, and you like you said, there it's sort of that existential angst of, okay, wow, this is I'm 17 or 16 years old, or however old they are, and my life is over, and how they are sort of ruminating on that, but also sort of gentle with each other. There's some romance with it between some of these characters. I think we can share, but even sort of the Takeshi Kitano character, who, if you don't know who Takeshi Kitano is, dude, you need to get a life and start digging into Japanese cinema. Takeshi Kitano is very much a self-made actor director. His stuff is so worth watching. I actually only started to watch his stuff a few years ago and was really, really blown away by him. But he kind of plays the mean gym teacher that is sort of tasked with administering the battle royale program to these young people. And we even get a glimpse into sort of his humanity. Like, what happens to a grown man that he would take this job. So
Right.
there's levels to the students. We kind of get a sense of their backgrounds, each one of them, but we also get a sense of sort of this reluctant antagonist in Takeshi Kitano's character, who's pretty great. Again, if you know who he is, and you watch him in this, think, oh, okay, this is going to be great. He does a particular thing. To me, he's like there's a sort of De Niro quality, like a Japanese De Niro quality for me about him. And again, he's not just a two-dimensional antagonist, just like the students aren't just two-dimensional. Okay, we're going to kill him off, and then we're going to kill her off. And so again, getting access to who these people are in dreams and flashbacks in these quieter moments helps punctuate the violence that has happened and will come again. So it's not like just wall-to-wall crazy violence like a lot of the reviews seem to lead you to believe. It's not that type of movie at all. It's a very, I think, well-balanced movie, considering its subject matter.
Yeah, it really is.
But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah. The last this is why I bring up the last scene too, because it's the scene where Takeshi Kitano and the girl are at the end.
Always announce that I guess there's going to be spoilers in this podcast.
Oh, right. I guess I don't even know if it's necessarily a spoiler, because it's like a flashback scene. You remember the one I'm talking about?
Oh, right. I remember now. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So it's like an emotional epilogue to it that was like not, I think, originally in the theatrical release. I guess we could say spoilers the thing.
I don't know if we necessarily have to explain what happens. Just that there's this really cool ending that, again, gives you even more insight into one of the characters, which was kind of cool because when I saw it, I didn't know about that alternate ending. I literally saw it on a bootleg VHS tape. Dated myself a little here, which kind of made it even more fun. Just the days of going to a Comic-Con and just hunting down bootleg Japanese movies and anime. You kids just don't know. Anyway, so fun. But no, again, that alternate ending or scene. Is it an alternate ending, or is it just sort of a deleted scene? It kind of feels like.
I thought it was one of those things where, there was like, multiple cuts of the movie. Some of them have got it, some of them don't. I don't really know what the deal is with it.
At least the way I'm remembering it, I don't know if what I'm remembering is correct. I don't know that I would say it's an alternate ending as much as it is a deleted scene that gives you a little more insight into one of the characters, which again even adds even more heart again to a movie that everyone is being led to believe through reviews that is heartless, because it's not. Again, that is really, it's interesting. I don't know if you know this, but some years ago, Quentin Tarantino was kind of on a tear of producing Japanese films. Like
Mhm.
after Kill, he executive produced, and actually he has a role in a movie, a great movie that does not get its due. The reviews on Rotten Tomatoes are not accurate at all, and you all should see it. And I'd like to review it at some point. Sukiyaki Western Django is one of my favorite movies. It is a samurai western made in 2007 by, again, controversial Japanese director Takeshi Miike, and it's so brilliant. And this was an era where, again, post Kill Bill, uh, Tarantino was executive producing some films in Japan, and he was going to do an adaptation of Battle Royale, an American slash Western adaptation of it. And again, obviously, the awful school shootings kept occurring, and it was something that nobody wanted to touch for obvious reasons, and it was shelved. And I still think there's probably a place for a movie like that,
Mm.
not because it necessarily would glorify the violence, but if you really examine Fukusaku and his son's creation here in Battle Royale, the heart of it is what's going on with our kids, what's going on with the broader culture
Yeah.
that is sort of tearing kids apart. So there's an opportunity there for a much deeper, really important conversation, which now will not be had because of a knee-jerk reaction. Again, not saying I necessarily want to see another version of Battle Royale, and we probably won't.
Yeah.
I can't imagine West, at least at the current moment, will make a movie like this. But I do think there's probably a massive missed opportunity to have a very important cultural conversation. Not that that's what movies have to be, and I personally am really sick of movies doing a worse and worse job of just seamlessly folding a message into a movie.
Yeah.
I feel like it can be done, and there's people that are able to do it brilliantly. Jordan Peele, I think, is at least in terms of modern directors, the most brilliant at it. Able to fold those things, those lessons and messages into his films in a way that is really fun and entertaining. So yeah, we're probably not going to get a battle royale, um, which is fine. I think that
Yeah. That's
some need to be remade, but it'd be interesting to see what that would have looked like. With Quentin Tarantino as an executive producer, I think he would have been able to do something really really fun. If he didn't direct it himself, maybe he would have he could have handpicked somebody. But it's fun to
yeah.
sort of what if. So
Yeah. Oh, always. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think about. Yeah, it's ironic, when we've been talking a little bit about sort of censorship and the role that plays, and in many respects, Battle Royale kind of speaks to, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of motives that go into why, like shootings happen, but it kind of touches on sort of this notion that deep down there are some kids out there want who want to be violent, and there's some kids out there who don't want to but are kind of driven to it by for other reasons. And it's ironic in the sense that, like you kind of mentioned, this type of movie in particular really does speak to sort of like the deeper why of how kids kind of come to these terrible conclusions about making the decision to shoot up a school. Um, and
I mean, I don't know. I
that,
don't know how much. I don't know how much it doesn't necessarily marinate on that, but it does give you, because what is it, like there's 42 students or something like that.
yeah,
You're able to, each one of the students sort of get, okay, just different slices of how someone might react to the situation. And
yeah,
it does, but right to your point, it gives you insight into, once someone has power over others, their true character, and not just character with a story, but their true moral character
yeah,
can be revealed. And that's again why I think this movie is so compelling and interesting. Again, I don't know what your experience was in school, but
Mm.
I just remember just a lot of kids, just for me, at least where I grew up, there were cool kids, and what I mean, like, people that were just sort of, just cool doing their thing, but there were a lot of kids that just existed to destroy other kids and just to hurt
Yeah.
people. And so, and that shows up again within this class. And I think that that's sort of important, this idea that, again, I'm an adult man now, but I still think back to, childhood, grade school, junior high, high school, and just how vicious kids can be. And
Mm.
maybe that's one of the things that really bothers some people, is we don't want to admit that human beings aren't, um, there's no instinct that there's no program or instinct that we're born with like animals are, of how to be human. Human beings need to be taught how to be human, and if they're not, they can kind of become monsters. They can bully kids, they can beat up on kids, and each other. And again, that comes from somewhere. It probably comes from, a lack of love or abuse in the household. But that's nicely folded in, and maybe that's what hits people, is we sort of admit, we sort of want to think, and because it is true, young people, you have your whole life ahead of you. For the most part, you're innocent, depending on what you've been exposed to in your life.
Yeah.
Not always. I knew some kids in grade school that just were real bastards, man. I remember, like, and I think back to it now, I'm just like, that was 30 years ago.
Mm.
Whoa. There do seem to be just some kids that are just more inclined, that if they get a chance to be mean, they will. And other kids, it's like, no, let's be friends. Let's go play a game and whatever. So maybe that is a raw nerve for some people. That, again, your kids are only as good as you teach them to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and for as eminently Japanese as this movie is, I think the fact that it taps into that, that kind of like universal understanding that something, you don't need to be Japanese to look at and feel
Right.
it resonate with you, is a real testament to the strength of the film. It gets
It
at
is
that
very.
kind of truth.
No, you're absolutely. I mean, it definitely has a Japanese sensibility, and again, for a country that just really doesn't have any violence and all that, it probably hits harder. And so it's interesting to see them make such a movie, and them to examine uh, sort of these themes. But yeah, it's pretty universal. If you've ever been a kid in school, and you may recognize yourself in some of these characters, which is, I think, is another sort of fun thing. It's like, okay, which one of them would I be if I'm put in this situation? But yes, for a uniquely Japanese film, it is very universal, in that everybody is an adolescent. Everybody, goes through that time where they're figuring out what they're about, what they want to do, having crushes, dealing with maybe less than stellar parents, maybe dealing with, bullies and all that. Uh, that's pretty universal throughout humanity. So it's a very accessible film in that
Yeah.
respect,
Mhm.
and it so beautifully shot. And again, the quieter moments, you've got, these the solid blue seas, and you've got the beautiful green forests, and they really did a great job of punctuating the violent scenes with like these beautiful sort of landscapes. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree. Like it really does broaden the appeal of the movie, and I agree. I think it's a shame that um, people kind of write it off in this kind of puritanical way, because I think there is really something for everyone to appreciate, to some degree, which feels a little weird to say about this movie in particular. It's like, yeah, it's got a little something for everyone, but I think it really does. And again, it represents in many ways, looking at kind of the arc of Fukusaku's career. Um, it is interesting that this, of all things, has the reputation it does, because like Battles Without Honor and Humanity, I think that is much more this kind of like tawdry violence, and it's awesome. But
Mm.
this is much more reserved, and much more heartfelt, I think, in many respects. As particularly,
Go ahead,
oh, sorry.
please. Sorry.
I was just going to say, particularly with Takeshi Kitano's character as well. Just this notion, and we get this in like that final scene too, where he says to her, like, what should I, as an adult, what should I say to a kid in this moment? This notion that, even though he's the one administering this, he kind of doesn't really know what he should be doing either. These roles.
Right.
As a teenager, you're kind of figuring out who you are and you're trying to form yourself. But Takeshi Kitano kind of reveals. Yeah.
That scene in particular is a great allegory sort of for, cycle of violence. Not that I necessarily believe in it, and it kind of makes me cringe when I say it, but I think there is something to the sort of inherited trauma, generational trauma, because it does exist. We have, we're in so many ways. I think the crisis in masculinity has a lot to do with, again, we had 2 world wars in the last century. My grandfather fought in World War II. Several of my friends' grandfathers fought, and then we have other friends of mine whose fathers were Vietnam, or they were in Desert Storm, or whatever it was, and so that moment for Kitano's character to be talking about that is it's an acknowledgement of, this is just, I guess, what I do. I don't know what to tell you, kid, but this is what I do, and this is what you do, and we're just supposed to. So it's sort of an acknowledgement that there have to be people out there, adults. They're just running on their programming. They've maybe never really thought too much about the fact that, okay, you have been abused as well. You've been through some really, really heavy stuff in your life that maybe you haven't dealt with because you're just told to just keep going. And then it keeps rolling forward from generation to generation. And that's a really important scene, I think. And it's there's a lot of, for sure. Again, there's so much to this movie, and it is worth seeing. Particularly, and I'm just a big believer in, if you're afraid of something, walk towards it, run towards it, figure out if you really are afraid of it, or maybe you're just misjudging it. Because you can always, watch something and be like, oh yeah, I was totally right. It was crap, and move on. And just be proud of yourself for being right. But I don't have a lot of respect for people who judge a work of art, be it film, painting, sculpture, without really taking the time to try to experience it, to take it in. And film is certainly that way. But this was a film also really got me into, because again, Kitano isn't on screen a whole lot, but he's such a force. He's one of those guys that just has an incredible presence, and that's sort of what triggered me to sort of want to watch more of him. And it took years before I did, but every time I would see this guy, I'm like, this guy is simultaneously compelling and terrifying. What else has he done? And I don't know, maybe we could, I guess, that's, I don't want to say too much more about Battle Royale unless you have more that you want to comment, anything that you should know.
I guess I would say very briefly, Takeshi Kitano's films, if you like Battle Royale, Takeshi Kitano's films are really a great place to jump off to. Like Sonatine, and I'm forgetting, there's a specific one that I can't remember the name of. But
which one did you say?
Sonatine, and
can you spell that? I just, the audience can.
Oh yeah, Sonatine.
I've got his Sonatine, 1993. Sonatine.
Yes.
Okay.
And
I've not seen that.
Yeah, Hanabi also draws a lot of cues. Very similar to Battle Royale in the sense of, it has the violence and this kind of big dramatic violence set pieces, but also slows down and kind of has an appreciation for this kind of melancholy and very aesthetically oriented, particularly Japanese pacing, which I really like. So that's definitely one of the
Sonatine is 93, Hanabi is 97. I recently rewatched his first two films, which sound pretty thematically a lot like what you mentioned. His first film from 1989 is Violent Cop. And again, this is Takeshi Kitano who plays the teacher character in Battle Royale who administers the program. So 1989 Violent Cop, and right after it, 1990 Boiling Point. I believe both these movies were streaming with limited ads on Tubi, and they're worth watching, but I would probably not watch them before bed because they're really, again, tonally just very, very heavy. Uh, there is a deep sadness to a lot of Kitano's films. They're very much of the, like, you don't have to be a stoic Japanese male to relate to these films. I think that there's a level of stoicism in most men, in how we're brought up and socialized to either uh, express or not express emotion. And those first two movies just really live in my head because you watch films like, man, if somebody would just talk to this guy, or if this guy would just talk to someone, maybe he could turn it around. But they're both really interesting examinations, I think, of the darker side of masculinity when men don't seem to have an outlet when they, and it's the stuff we're dealing with right now, the men that just don't have a perceived sense of hope, men who are just between a rock and a hard place, just trying to figure it out, but aren't completely equipped to deal with life in the way that maybe some of us, guys like you and I, are. But at the same time, they're also beautifully shot. There's something about particularly his late 80s, early 90s films where it looks very professional in terms of like how dressing. Again, Japan's more conservative country. So if you just saw uh, clips or frames of this movie, it could be anything. But then you sort of layer in the fact that he's a cop, or he's a gangster, or he's an enforcer, or he's a disaffected father, or whatnot. There's just many levels to. Uh, I regret to. I hate to say this because I don't want to push people away from it, but they're sort of man film, sort of masculine cinema. They're examinations of what it's like to be a man, sort of in the modern world. And granted, I know 1993 was 30 years ago, and some of these movies are a little older than that. But again, men, I think, are still dealing with a lot of similar issues, and they're worth watching if you're interested in film. They're worth watching if you are interested in sort of seeing slice of life films. They're really good at sort of sliding in different subcultures, like gangster subcultures. There's a few gay characters, and he does a really good job of just sort of folding these things in a way that isn't in any way sort of ostentatious. They're just people in that world. So his stuff is worth watching. I highly recommend starting at the beginning with A Violent Cop and Boiling Point. Again, last I looked, they were streaming with limited ads on Tubi. But again, you mentioned Hanabi and Sonatine. I need to see those because I haven't watched either one.
Yeah. Oh, and Kikujiro, also great. Very different. Have you seen that?
Say that again.
Have you seen Kikujiro? It's another.
No, I got his filmography up right here. I think a lot of these I can find on Prime. I think some of his stuff has been on Criterion as well. I don't know if they've been given Criterion editions, but yeah, I might go. I might go down the Takeshi Kitano rabbit hole because I've got real gaps, like more so than Friedkin in Kitano. But a couple others that I want to mention, just Battle Royale sort of being a teen, not a teen movie, but a movie surrounding teens under incredible duress and pressure, and it being October as of this recording, mid-October, and we're being in the Halloween season, a film that I really didn't know what I was getting into when I turned it on, and have come to really love and appreciate because I've never seen anything like it since. It really is. It's a genre film, but it's very much in this sort of a class of its own. It's a 1977 Japanese horror film called House.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so fun. It's a little wild. It uses a lot of rear and front projection, a lot of
Mm.
practical effects. Essentially it's a film it's not your traditional haunted house movie. It's about these young women that decide to go up to, I guess, one of the girls' aunt's house up in the hills or something for like a weekend. I mean, it sounds like every horror teen slasher film you've ever heard of, but the way this movie is executed, it's so much more than that. It's not a slasher at all. It's got more of a supernatural bend, ghosts type of stuff going on. And it is, I will say this, if you're not a fan of art house, this is definitely an art house horror film. So it very much has sort of that fever dream, sort of waking nightmare sort of look to it. But that's, as far as I'm concerned, what makes it so great. It's super colorful. It's, again, the Japanese are impeccable with, painting backgrounds and building sets.
Mm.
And again, you have a group of girls that have sort of their unique archetypes, and it's a fun, interesting horror film that you should watch this Halloween season. And again, it deals with young people. I don't know that it goes as deep as Battle Royale does with the characters, but it's
Yeah.
still a lot of fun to watch. There is a little bit of sort of sadness and sort of romantic tragedy, I guess, towards the end. And I don't want to go too much away. Just maybe watch it. I
Yeah.
believe it is on Criterion Channel, which is the streaming service of the Criterion Collection, in their art house horror. There's art house horror, 90s horror packaging or programming blocks right now on Criterion Channel. Have you seen House? Do you like House?
Yeah, I have. It's a lot of fun. I would agree. Yeah, if you are in the market for something that is crazy, it's very wild and very unique. Seminal in a lot of respects too. That if you look at a lot of Japanese media, it's one of those movies that you watch and you go like, oh, that's where that came from. That's
Came from.
crazy. I had no idea.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting because it like 77 is kind of an interesting year for cinema in general. And I don't know a whole lot about Japanese cinema from the 70s, but I've started to sort of dig around, and I don't know that there was weren't a lot of movies like that coming out at the time, and I don't think there's been anything since. It seems that it's sort of like a one-off. Like the Japanese wouldn't really hit their stride with horror until Ringu in 1998, and sort of like the kickoff of the Japanese horror renaissance. Ringu and Grudge and Ju-on, all those really sort of kicked that off. You're right. You watch House, and you can see, sort of archetypal Japanese schoolgirls, and you can see, sort of things that you recognize as tropes now in anime and J drama like that. So yeah, so that's a lot of fun. Again, Battle Royale, House, and what do I have? There's another one. It's not a Japanese film, but it does keep the trend, I guess, with teenage girls. There's a really, and I believe it's in the art house horror programming block right now at Criterion Channel. It's called The Picnic at Hanging Rock from 1975. It's an Australian film about sort of these girls that are being taught at, I believe it's still sort of colonial times. So it's a British school, an English school, and these young women are, they're being educated, and they decide that they're going to go off for a picnic at this place called Hanging Rock, sort of just out in the bush, but, just sort of getting out to nature, getting out to get some fresh air and so on. And the story really starts from there, how these young women maneuver being out in this wilderness, and also the adults, the teachers. You're watching it, and you expect it to unfold a particular way, and in some ways it fulfills what the audience expects and what they want, but it also beautifully plays against expectations as well. So those would be my two sort of teens in distress horror movies, that you maybe pair up with Battle Royale. So Battle Royale 2000, Kinji Fukusaku. You have House from 1977. I don't recall the director's name. and then you have the Picnic at Hanging Rock, 1977. I'm sorry, 1975, Australia. Anything sort of in this vein that you think might pair well with the battle royale meal, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess I would just want to plug Kitano again. You know, like his range, the
Yeah.
range that he has in his films is really fantastic. And you know, a lot of his stuff will match the tone. If you've never ever seen a Takeshi Kitano movie, there's a very wide variety of tones and genres that he goes across, but like you said, kind of deals with a lot of these themes of kind of like, you know, masculine societal alienation,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, there's violence, but also kind of like this very nice sense of aesthetic beauty to it. I think the best for someone who's never seen Takeshi Kitano, the best way I could pitch it would be like a lot of his movies are scored by Joe Hisaishi, who is
Oh,
best known for
amazing.
doing, you know, the Studio Ghibli movies and working with Hayao Miyazaki, the Spirited Away,
Right.
Howl's Moving Castle, all these really, really great, really iconic and very beautiful orchestral scores. You
Yes.
know, he scores a lot of Takeshi Kitano's movies too, and I think that you know, would for someone who's not seen it is the best way I can kind of indicate, like, yes, these are kind of violent and kind of dark and kind of masculine films, but they have this kind of emotional depth and sensitivity to them as well that is very substantive in the same way that Battle Royale has as well.
No,
So
beautifully said. It's they're not just tough guy movies for the sake of tough guy movies. You feel for these characters in his films so much, and you're right. It really Joe Hisaishi's scores. Again, if you're not familiar with him, you obviously don't watch anime. You don't watch Ghibli. One of my favorite scores of Hisaishi's. There's an anime film, I believe, from the late '80s. I remember renting it from Blockbuster as a kid. The Venus Wars. It's still. Do you know Venus Wars?
I've never heard of that.
Okay, no, it's a classic. I think it's streaming out there somewhere. You can find it, or maybe we'll watch it at one of our Kino nights at some point.
Yeah, we
But
should.
it's a Joe Hisaishi score. It's based on a manga, and again, it also deals with young people living on Venus, just trying to survive and trying to make their way. So again, that existential angst and all that. But no, that's the beauty of Kitano's films are that so many of them, because he wrote a lot of them. But I know I believe wrote Violent Cop and Boiling Point. I don't know if he directed them, but so many of his films really have his sort of vision because again he wrote them and or directed them or wrote them and acted in them. But then to your point of they're punctuated with these incredible scores by Joe Hisaishi, who recently passed away. I think what was it? He passed away, was it a year or two ago? He
Mm.
just passed. And the guy, he's the type of composer that you can just pick anything, literally anything he's ever scored, and just listen to it from beginning to end. And he just, I've done workouts, I've done cardio just listening to his stuff, which sounds crazy because a lot of his stuff is orchestral, but not all of it.
Yeah.
Worth your time. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, man, that's all I've really got for this week. But I think the folks out there, man, if you guys have got so much fun ahead of you if you watch even half of these films.
Yeah.
Sure, for sure, man. Well, yeah. So that's it for this week, guys. Again, Battle Royale and all the other stuff. I can't recall if Battle Royale is. I think it might be. It was in the programming block on Criterion Channel with the other stuff. And head over there now and catch again the art house and the 90s horror programming block, both great. And we will catch you guys next time. So thanks again, man.
All right. Thank you.